very good morning to everyone. I, Natasha, a student of fourth year BA LLB, on behalf of CMR University School of Legal Studies, extend a hearty welcome to all the dignitaries who have joined us today for the inauguration of the Center for Gender Justice and Law. This is also to bring to your kind attention that Mrs. Rekha Sharma, Honorable Chairperson, National Commission for Women, is unable to join us due to unforeseen and unavoidable circumstances. However, one of the important lessons we have learned over the past years is to keep moving on in spite of the hurdles we face. In the words of Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General, United Nations, achieving gender equality requires the engagement of women and men, girls and boys. It is everyone's responsibility. As we all know, gender is one among many inequalities that have plagued our social system for centuries. The current status of women and the challenges the society faces are linked to the deep-rooted existence of gender inequality in our lives. Despite various measures by government and other organizations, many issues related to gender justice have not received their due attention and needs deep probing to attain social justice for all. In this context, it seems inevitable to work with the multiple paradigms of gender to produce resilient visions of transformation that will contribute to an emergence of new discourse of gender justice. It is with time that we as a nation will be able to achieve this goal. With this, we would formally begin the inaugural ceremony, for which I would like to invite Prithvi Shenoy, a student of first year LLB, to render the invocation song.
He Sharade Ma, 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 अज्ञानता से हमें तार दे माँ, हमें तार दे माँ. हे शारदे माँ, हे शारदे माँ, हे शारदे. तू स्वर की देवी, संगीत तुझसे, तू स्वर की देवी, संगीत तुझसे, हर शब्द तेरा है, हर गीत तुझसे. हम हैं अकेले, हम हैं अधूरे, तेरी शरण में हमें प्यार दे माँ, हमें प्यार दे माँ. हे शारदे माँ, हे शारदे माँ, हे शारदे माँ. मुनियों ने समझी, गुणियों ने जानी, ओ मुनियों ने समझी, गुणियों ने जानी, वेदों की भाषा, पुराणों की वाणी. हम भी तो समझे, हम भी तो जाने, विद्या का हमको अधिकार दे माँ, अधिकार दे माँ. हे शारदे माँ, हे शारदे माँ, हे शारदे माँ. Thank you.
Thank you, Prithvi. Now, I would like to invite Hariharan, a student of second year LLB, to deliver the introductory speech for the event.
Thank you, Natasha. The issue of gender equalities is not a new issue which has emerged in present society. It has been prevailing in all parts of the world and in society. Women, though, are considered equal to men, but only in legislation. But in reality, women are subject to various kinds of exploitation, discrimination, and human rights violation. The stereotypical attitude of men towards women has been passed on from generation to generation, and it has got the nature of a social norm which cannot be questioned or changed. When we talk about human rights protection, it means and includes men and women are equal before law, and equal protection has to be extended from them, and at no point of time there has to be any discrimination. The attitude of discrimination and gender equality began right from the time the child is conceived, and if the girl child has no right to life, the child is killed in the womb itself by sex selective methods. And in case the girl escapes, the girl is killed once she comes out of the womb and the family decides to put an end to the child's life, thinking about the future problems. Women suffer throughout their life in one form or another, whether it's physical or mental torture. They're subject to rape, trafficking, abduction, forced prostitution, sexual harassment at workplace, dowry demand, domestic violence, etc. And this inequality has been practiced from Vedic ages. Manu has said women should be under the custody of her father when she is young, and under her husband's custody when she is married, and under her son in the old age. This shows that at no point and by no means a woman is considered as an independent human being, but is always under the subjugation of a man. Lord Denning once said, and I quote, "A woman feels as keenly, thinks as clearly as a man. She is in sphere, does work as useful as a man does. She has as much right to her freedom to develop her personality to full as a man. When she marries, she does not become the servant, but his equal partner. If his work is more important than life for community and more important than life for family, neither can do without the other. Neither is above the other or under the other. They are equals." Unquote. When we examine the provisions of the Constitution, despite the Constitution providing protection to women under various articles such as Article 14, Article 15.3, its practical application is ineffective at large. The Center for Gender Studies at CMR University School of Legal Studies thus aims to narrow this gap and make a difference. Women, though constituting half the population of the country, still their existence is not recognized or respected, and they're still subject to exploitation. Whether it is at home, at place of work, or in court, and this often leads to inequality and injustice for women. Chief Justice Anand has rightly pointed out that the fight for women for their rights is not a fight against men. It is a fight against unjustified traditions and the male-centered created Lakshman Rekha, which women are not supposed to cross. Krishna Iyer once quoted, and I quote, "The fight is not for women's status, but for human worth. The claim is not to end inequality of women, but to restore universal justice. The bid is not for loaves of fish for the forsaken gender, but for the cosmic harmony which never comes till a woman comes." Unquote. We observe world over March 8th as International Women's Day with the object of ensuring women that they're recognized and remembered for their service and sacrifices. But in fact, it must be considered as a day to ponder on the fact on what extent progress has been achieved by women when compared to the previous year. Since in our society, girls are brought up under the domination of males and are always dependent on them, it is difficult to bring them out of the vicious circle. Therefore, the need of the hour is to provide them education, encourage and inculcate leadership qualities, self-reliance, develop courage, and meet challenges and remove caste and religious barriers. And the most important is to change the attitude or the mindset of men towards women. In order to achieve these objectives, CMR University School of Legal Studies has decided to establish a Center for Gender Justice. This center is different from the college or department imparting the education in law, but its thrust is in research and training. It shall consist of a coordinator who is a professor in law with sufficient experience in research guidance. The vision of the center, molding young minds and equip themselves to overcome all kinds of obstacles and discrimination, create a positive shift in the mindset of people as to gender inequality. Missions. First, creating awareness as to gender equality. Second, providing legal education as to various kinds of rights provided under the constitutional law and other enactments to protect them from discrimination, exploitation. Next, inculcate them in qualities of self-reliance, confidence, economic confidence. Fourth, providing suitable guidance to get rid of gender bias and discrimination. And last but not least, extend support to research on women-related issues. The objectives of the center are as follows. First, to undertake and to promote detailed research and in-depth studies in laws pertaining to women with a view to critically review the laws and suggest law reforms. Second, to organize programs like arranging periodical seminars and conferences on topics concerning women's issues, thereby providing a forum for interaction to the academicians, representatives of voluntary organizations and government agencies, and all those groups working for women's development. Third, to arrange talks by eminent scholars in order to sensitize and bring greater awareness among students, members of teaching faculties, and general public regarding women's multidimensional roles. Next, to develop library resource material and strong documentation center relating to research on studies on women that will help restructure the existing curriculum and courses and will provide a retrieval system for the university's own research, training, and action programs. Next, to undertake extension activities for the development of women by collaborating with voluntary organizations that could enable the center to plan an interventionist role for the improvement of women and particular in society in general. Last but not the least, to undertake publication of such research studies, periodicals, special lectures, and reports of seminars and conferences, which could result in providing good reading material and database relevant for women's issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Hariharan. I would now like to call upon our respected Dean, Dr. T.R. Subramanya, to deliver the welcome address.
A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Savita Ramamurthy, Honorable Chancellor of CMR Group of Institutions and CMR University, and President of this function, respected Dr. Sri K.C. Ramamurthy, Chairman of the CMR Group of Institutions, Sri Bhaskar Reddy, the Pro Vice Chancellor of the CMR University, respected deans, and the chief guest of the function, Dr. Shashikala Gurupur. I deem it a great privilege to welcome the inaugural address of Dr. Shashikala Gurupur as well as the function. We just thought of establishing a center and requested the university to permit us to go ahead. Thereafterwards, we gave the objectives and the vision as well as the mission, and the university was kind enough to approve this. Naturally, in any leading educational center, a center for women's studies is very much essential. It is all the more relevant because the Constitution, although has given protection under several provisions, including Article 15.1 as well as Article 15.3 of the Constitution of India, the realization of these objectives has not come to the fullest satisfaction of everyone. With this in view, charity naturally should begin at home. And every student, especially a student of law, must not only learn first and afterwards realize and cherish and have a program of his own in his life to implement these objectives. And there are several other objectives as well. On behalf of the CMR Group of Institutions, I welcome not only the chairman of this function and the chairman of the group of institutions, the respected deans, the respected office bearers, the respected students, and those who have come here by invitation. It is a great honor to welcome Dr. Shashikala Gurupur. Dr. Shashikala Gurupur, the speaker who is going to deliver the keynote address, has been the Dean of the Symbiosis Law School International University since 2006, and she has been serving in this capacity. I don't wish to say much about it because there will be a person who is going to speak and read out her entire biodata. However, I just intend to bring home one point. 2 years ago, she had come here. And having come here, she had delivered a lecture on criminal law. You will be wonderstruck. Soon after the function, it was put on the YouTube. Today, as many as 46,000 people have watched it and they have put the comments. That naturally speaks about the eminence of the scholar. And I don't wish to say anything. Besides this, she is a member of several bodies and governing council members, and she was a member of the Law Commission of India as well. And she was in the academic council of the National Judicial Academy situated in Bhopal. Madam, we are honored to have you, and we wish many more things to happen in this university under your behest. Once again, I thank and welcome all of you who are present here.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to call upon Anshika, a student of fourth year BBA LLB, to introduce our honorable chief guest, Professor Dr. Shashikala Gurpur, Director, Symbiosis Law School, Pune, Dean, Faculty of Law, Symbiosis International University.
Thank you, Natasha. Professor Dr. Shashikala Gurpur is a distinguished academician and orator, having presented more than 200 invited lectures, workshops, and seminars, not only across India, but Thailand, US, UK, Ireland, Germany, Australia, Canada, and UAE. She has an outstanding career with a wide range of experience in teaching, research, and industry, and has been continuing with the Symbiosis Law School, Pune since 2007. Dr. Gurpur received her PhD in international law from Mysore University, where she was a topper and gold medalist in LLM. Her career span includes long years of experience in legal literacy and gender training, where she served as the co-director in gender and human rights-based wing of an NGO for over 2 years. She has also worked as HR manager and administration in an MNC in Abu Dhabi from 2004 to 2007. She has more than 24 years of teaching experience, which includes tenures in NLSIU Bangalore, SDM Law College Mangalore, Manipal Institute of Communication, and University College Cork, Ireland. Dr. Gurpur has been a member of the Law Commission of India. Currently, she is a part of the Curriculum Development Committee, Bar Council of India, and on the Academic Council of National Judicial Academy, Bhopal. She is also on the advisory board and is a PhD referee to several national law schools and universities across India. She is associated with the academic and governing councils and research teams of several national law schools and universities, including IGNOU, NALSAR, NLSIU Bangalore, NLU Mumbai, and NLU Nagpur, among others, and is also a member of the International Consortium of Law Schools. Recently, Dr. Shashikala Gurpur has been nominated as a member of the Maratha Chamber of Commerce, Industries and Agriculture Corporate Legislation Committee 2020 to 2022. She has been appointed as a distinguished member of the editorial board of the Cyber Law University International e-Journal as well. Dr. Gurpur has 65 articles and research papers, 2 co-authored books, and 12 book chapters to her credit. Dr. Gurpur has been listed in the book of 100 Legal Luminaries of India by LexisNexis, along with Dr. N.R. Madhava Menon, Senior Counsel Indira Jaising, Advocate Arun Jaitley, Advocate Ram Jethmalani, among others. It is indeed an honor and privilege to have you amongst us, ma'am. We welcome you.
Thank you, Anshika. I now request ma'am to kindly declare the center open and to thereon give the inaugural address. Over to you, ma'am.
On behalf of CMR School of Law, and also on behalf of all the women of this country and law students and legal system stakeholders in this country, in the absence of the National Women's Commission representation, it's my privilege and honor to declare the Gender and Law Center open on behalf of CMR Law School. I wish the center all the best, and I wish that great impacting research as well as activities come out of this center, impacting the landscape of gender equality in India and in humanity. After this inaugural declaration, I will proceed with my inaugural address with your kind permission. Respected Dr. Subramania Sir, the Dean of the CMR Law School, respected faculty, dear students, and all others who have assembled here in large numbers, this is a historic moment for a very recent young law school to have such a crucial area as its research priority, and to have such a well-conceived, comprehensive gender and law center. What I am very happy to see is that the comprehensiveness comes from 3 facets. One is the study facet, the research facet, and education facet. Second is creation of knowledge facet, which is in the research, especially impacting research in terms of law reform proposals and community-based law reform. Third is mainly in terms of social transformation towards the attitude towards gender in the students and in the research community, as well as in the community at large. I was listening to once upon a time the president of Pennsylvania University, a very, very seasoned historian. This professor was telling that if you want to do well, you do good. That means an educational institution or a university has a social responsibility. What we call in business organizations corporate social responsibility is translated in educational institutions as institutional social responsibility. So one of the agenda of this center corresponds with that kind of institutional social responsibility on a very, very pertinent problem, on a serious problem of our contemporary times and of history, as already the students who gave the introduction mentioned and Professor Subramania mentioned, that is gender issue. Now, I would like to posit before you 8 different points. The first point is about what is our understanding of gender. If I ask in this audience to write a word which corresponds with man and corresponds with woman, I'm sure irrespective of your educational level and life experience, unless you are critically conscientized, what I mean by critically conscientized is where you question what is socially thrown at you in the light of awareness and in the light of self-questioning. Unless you have done that, normally the answers are man corresponds with authority, man corresponds with strength, man corresponds with seriousness, man corresponds with leadership. Woman corresponds with care, woman corresponds with the timid, woman corresponds with the patience, woman corresponds with the weak. So strong and weak, somebody who is timid and powerful. So like this, the binary way of looking at gender and looking at women corresponding with something and man corresponding with something comes out. We always do this exercise in different communities and in different audience. Now, when we do the exercise, we have a precaution. We say that within next 30 seconds, what comes to your mind corresponding with the man and corresponding with the woman, please note down. Then within 30 seconds, they write down, we collect it, and then we plot it on a board. And then this kind of binary understanding comes out on the board, irrespective of qualification, irrespective of age group, even if it's illiterate or highly qualified. Now, why does this happen? Now, this is what we call as stereotype. Each one of us is influenced by the society, by this understanding of man and woman, which is primarily based on the body or the biological sex. And we have attributed social meanings to this biological sex in such a way that one comes out as the opposite of the other or the extreme of the other. This thought process is repeated in the society intergenerationally. That's why it's called stereotype. It is representation of someone based on the biological being or biological side, as if your biology is your destiny. So when we do such brainstorming session, we ask a question. Suppose man is strong. How do you interpret strength? Is it the size of the muscle? Is it the ability to run? Is it the structure of the bone? Is it only anatomy? If strength is interpreted in terms of endurance to pain, what is the kind of highest pain that a man goes through in normal circumstances in life? Now, highest pain a man goes through could be a kidney stone pain or a kind of chest pain when there is angina or attack. Now, highest pain that woman goes through is the birthing pain. Now, birthing pain by any scale is comparable 500 times the kidney stone pain. Now, if a woman could endure that and take creation further in that anatomically designed body, then how do you say that this is strong and this is weak? If you say that woman's job is to cook and man's job is to stay in an office or earn money, etc., then the highest paid chef is man. There are only slowly women are coming out as corporate chefs and 5-star chefs, because chef's work involves round the clock work, and who minds the kids at home? Who makes home? So usually the way we attribute these values, these roles, the significance has been on the basis of the assumption that biology is destiny. Physical anatomical structure is the one which determines. So a woman who cannot carry a child in her body, a woman who decides against this role in creation, etc., are labeled in literature, caricatured in popular media, without any critical consciousness. So if you are looking at form, then gender has definitely been a category which has resulted in injustice. And justice is about taking this biologically attributed qualities and characters or biological attributes beyond the biology into essence. Now that requires critical consciousness. Now this critical consciousness, which Catherine McKinnon talks of, she's a radical feminist, and Catherine McKinnon picks it up from another social transformation scientist called Paulo Freire. It is about pedagogy of the oppressed. So the gender or the sex which has been considered as the second sex or weaker sex has always been the oppressed one, because it has been at the receiving end of the society's understanding of it, rather than the determining participatory force of the society. So that is where I think that this center's agenda is going to be in making, as clearly said, making the participants and every student in CMR Law School and those who are participating in CMR Law School's program to challenge their assumption about this idea of gender, this idea of male and female. Today we are at a time frame where it is not just understanding of transgender, there is the understanding of what we call as multiple sexuality community. There is the understanding of what Supreme Court said, third gender. Now here also, let us be very careful that what is underlying is the assumption of dominant idea of male and female vis-a-vis the other. I hope all the students and audiences is understanding this. I don't want to complicate the understanding. In 1983, when the United Nations Development Program came out with the idea of gender-based violence, it said that 95% of the cases, perpetrators are men. In 5% of the cases in gender-based violence, perpetrators are women who consider themselves or behave like men. There is no behavior called as man's behavior or woman's behavior. The dominant mode of behavior which helps men to keep their power in the family and in general in public life, private life and public life. When women also represent such behavior, they turn out to replicate or express the similar violent behavior. If we come out of it and if we see heterosexual, homosexual marriages or transsexual marriages, not that those are happy, rosy marriages. Even in those marriages or unions or relationships, the one who is aggressive is the husband cognate or the male equivalent. That means this whole thought process, which is male-centric, so-called father-centric thought process and ideology and the power is called as patriarchy, a social system whereby the authority and the supremacy of the man has been asserted, and it is continued transgenerationally, passed off as a dominant mode of thinking. So this is where we have deeper understanding of gender. Gender is about that kind of connotation attributed to the biological sex in a socio-political manner. At one point, Anne Oakley said, social construct of the biological sex. Today, our understanding is it's not just social construct, it's a socio-political construct, because someone who is born male later realizes that whether that person is completely fitting into the male attribute, therefore they declare themselves as transgender or choose not to behave like men or may choose to behave like transsexual. Now that is exactly where a society which is based on democracy, on rule of law, should be respecting the personal choices. Now these personal choices many times are political choices as well, where they start internally questioning the dominant power's way of controlling or determining their worldview. So understanding of gender is not just about society. It's not just about culture. It's about politics. It's about justice. So what is this justice concept? So I'm very sure all of you are taking in the positions that I have highlighted so far, that gender is a socio-political connotation attributed to biological sex. And it is not just male and female, there is also the third gender dimension, and there are transgender variations. Now, this is not the given. This is what an individual chooses as an individual grows up. Our question is, how is justice reflecting this? What is this concept of justice? We know that justice is a concept of a kind of peacefulness and equilibrium in the society where everyone, each one has their due. Now, we have the most accepted definition of justice as fairness, and we have the justice in terms of what Amartya Sen calls as niti and nyaya. If you go to Constitution's Article 141 and 142, 141 reflects this justice according to law, where the court has to follow the precedents and it has to go by those official sources of law to determine the outcome of a dispute. But then there is 142, which corresponds with Amartya Sen's Nyaya, which is administration of justice and resolving dispute and protection of concept of justice with the inherent powers of the court. Now, that is not lawless kind of justice, but it is the connotation of justice which needs to be put in the center irrespective of the rules. So court doesn't make a law there, but court does not restrict itself in achieving the ends of justice to the letter of the law. This is exactly where impacting research plays on the mind of the judge. And this is where impacting research guides the judge to achieve justice. If you look at the works or reflections of Justice Bhagavati or Justice Krishna Iyer or Justice Chandrachud Senior, especially in the context of Shabano case or earlier cases like C.B. Muttama case, you will see how the Supreme Court has gone beyond the restrictions of the letter of law. So if we are looking at gender justice, it's a comprehensive goal. It's a comprehensive project. Now, what does that comprehensive project entail? Now, that comprehensive project entails one's understanding of the political reality in terms of social equality, economic equality, political equality enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution. And the idea of justice also enshrined in terms of socio-political economic justice. So if we connect gender to that, it's a comprehensive project because gender-based injustice is to be set right. Gender-based justice also is to be brought in. Our understanding of justice is twofold. One is procedural or functional justice, where we look at law as the means to perform this function of justice. What if the reality is not contained in the letter of the law, whether in the form of legislation or in the form of precedents? That is where the social engineer role of all of us, the law graduates and stakeholders in the legal system, comes in. Therefore, here, gender justice as a comprehensive role does not, or project, does not restrict to the courts. It comes to prosecution system, it comes to legal profession, it comes to forensics, it comes to those of us who are supporting the disputant or the litigant who is not able to find a voice or who doesn't have the power. So gender justice as a comprehensive project has got a very strong linkage with advocacy. It has a very strong linkage with critically thinking of the systems in terms of, do they really reflect this sense of equality? Do they address the needs of the society? Is there anything that requires to be, we can say, requires to be reformed in order to make it, in order to make it respond or reverberate the needs of those who are invisible and voiceless in this system? So these questions and these concerns will have to be there in those who are working on gender and law dimension. I will look in terms of how these aspects can be realistic. Catherine McKinnon, again radical feminist, once said that equality is a male norm. Is equality a male norm? Our Indian writers, especially the Ratna Kapoor and Neena Kapoor. Neena Kapoor was the one who was very, very instrumental in formulating the Vishaka versus state of Rajasthan, the famous litigation, which later became the POSH Act, Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace Act. The Vishaka guidelines by Justice Verma have remained as a history in this country as a precursor to that legislation. Ratna Kapoor has written extensively on feminist jurisprudence, and she uses this proposition, is equality a male norm, in the context of then India had Evidence Act, which had Section 54. Section 54 of the Evidence Act said that character of the prosecutrix in a rape trial should be used in a manner advantageous to the accused. So the investigation is done into the character of the rape victim rather than into the character of the accused, because of the general principle of the criminal law that let 1,000 guilty escape but not punish one innocent. So until there was a big social march on the streets of India, right from consumer movement and later on with the Mathura case. I don't know how many of you have, you are younger generation, you are aware of the history of this section 114 of the Indian Evidence Act. The entire amendment to custodial rape means if there is a rape reported in the custody. Custody is a broader term, courts have interpreted later on, you should read these things. So in case of a custodial rape which happens in the space of an authority alleged to have, then the burden of proof is not on the accused. Character investigation is not about the, not on the prosecution, which represents the survivor or the victim. So burden of proof is not on the prosecution, but on the accused. So the burden of proof shifts according to 114, the amended provision of the Indian Evidence Act. Now this provision came because of these whole protests which cluttered the streets of Mumbai. The feminists, the social organizations got together. The story behind this protest is the story of a tribal girl, Mathura, who was produced before the police station by her brother for eloping, and then the police, in the name of investigation, took her inside, men police, and then for hours there was no sound, so the brother alarmed, and then they only found that she was gang raped by the policemen. So the courts, when they reflected, they went by this concept of consent, and they said that since there was no resistance and Mathura already had a boyfriend, therefore she could be a woman of easy virtue. See the assumptions, patriarchal assumptions, we say that a woman, virtuous woman, protests from the beginning, an unchaste woman doesn't protest, therefore she consents. So deeper layers of these patriarchal assumptions in the judicial minds was a part of pain and resistance. So you see the protests resulting in amendment to the Indian Evidence Act and the entire idea of custodial rape. And then the missed responsibility of the state translating into state tort. So we have cases like Chandrima Das case, which came later, where gang rape in the railway station waiting room of a Bangla woman was an issue. So state was made to pay compensation in such cases. So state's aberration. In Vishaka case as well, Bhavri Devi, the social reformer and animator who was working on Roop Kanwar, Sati and social transformation, was gang raped because she was an animator in the villages. Now, whether her victimization was simply an accident? No, she was working on behalf of the state. So they went, the courts, in the beginning it was considered as any rape, but then when it came before the Supreme Court with the Kapoor sisters' attempt, it was taken as a case of state's negligence and state as an employer making her the victim of sexual harassment. So state's responsibility in protecting gender justice and gender equality has been highlighted in these cases, and it also showed how the state needs to work hard at achieving a gender safe and a gender just India. Now we see, I told you gender justice is a comprehensive project. That means it is not just in the courts of law that the battle for justice is on. There has to be comprehensive justice in the sense of preventive endangerment to gender equality. There has to be protection of the idea of gender justice. There has to be remedy in the form of disputes, etc. There has to be other disciplines and systems coming in. So from this point of view, if we look at our own profession, or if you look at the rule of law indices in terms of court structures, how friendly are our courts for women? Are our courts gender friendly? How do you make a court gender friendly? How do you make a court a place where women don't get, or victims of gender violence do not get intimidated? How do we make our police stations friendly? What about women or those who are more vulnerable due to gender? See, among women also, there are women who are more vulnerable. Like in Karnataka, we did Dr. Jayamala's reporting consultancy, and there her whole report was concentrating on the female sex workers of Karnataka and their pain of exploitation and their unequal treatment by the legal system. Based on the Buddhadev Karmaskar case, where the rape and murder of a sex worker was in the core, Supreme Court ordered under the leadership of Justice Karju and Gyan Sudha Mishra to conduct a study which revealed the plight of these sex workers. So state of Karnataka took it up seriously. Dr. Jayamala committee did an extensive study and presented the report, which resulted in a lot of unprecedented budgetary sanction and provisions. So this kind of selective remedying of the more vulnerable segments within the given gender is one dimension. Following Jayamala committee report, there is a possibility of transgender sex workers, TSW, going to be a possibility. In Pune, we did State Resource Center related work on transgender sex workers and transgender community, and it resulted in a kind of paralegal training and lesser incidents of police violence to this community. So we would like to highlight here that when you look at equality as a male norm, is equality a male norm? Means unequal situations of women not addressed by law, unequal situations of those who are equivalent to women, cognate of women in the transgender community not being addressed by law, or when it is addressed also, when they go to these strong, first of all, to go to the court of law, you have to have money. Otherwise, you approach by legal aid. Therefore, working with the Legal Aid Services Authority, as we did in our law school, is very important to get gender justice. And if you go to the court of law, how prejudicial are the judges? As I gave you the example of Mathura case or Buddhadev Karmaskar case, till it reached the Supreme Court. Or if you talk to the sex workers in your neighborhood, you would vouch for the fact, which was found by the committee report, that police suffer from their own biases. In the court, they are made to wait whole day, and judges would say, let them wait. So these kinds of indifferences, which Justice Kumar pointed out in one of his sessions with the committee in the focus group. So the systemic bias, gender bias, is another issue which stands as a roadblock in achieving gender equality. Bias in the language of the judges, bias in the procedure of the court. Bias is not only about not being sensitive to the nuances, and not being, it is about denial, it is about exclusion, it is about exploitation. Now, denial, exclusion, exploitation. Look at these three words. This can happen in your home, as Dr. Subramania pointed out. Charity begins at home, gender justice begins at home. The weak gender, so-called weak gender, or the other gender, if there is a family member who is confused gender identity, who may like to dress like a woman even though the body has got certain anatomical signs of male, or has anatomical signs of female but wants to look like a male, suddenly there is a big upheaval in the house. They don't seem to understand the scientific medical dimensions behind this, or take the child to a counselor and try to find out. And if that is what the child chooses, how many parents are willing to accept? How many parents are open to this? And what kind of legal questions, rights questions emerge? Can they deprive them a share in their property? Or can they exclude them in social situations? Can they throw them out of the house and make them destitute? No. We have different provisions of law safeguarding the rights of these people. I don't know how many of you have read about Akai. Akai is a very celebrated transgender activist who is based in Bangalore. Watch her videos, watch her life story. She was thrown out of the house because she was not fitting into the given binary of gender. And finally, she had to organize, and with all her pain, she had to work as a street sex worker and organized her life afterwards, and then ascended to the level of being a global spokesperson behind the Yogakarta principles of United Nations Organization and many other legal initiatives. Now, Akai's life journey, if you see, it's a journey in fighting the bias, exclusion, denial, exploitation. So protection of the rights of transgenders, as India has just passed the transgender bill, is also equally important. But my engagement with you is, unless you first understand this binary gender dimension and first start critically evaluating the thought process, the system, the observation, you cannot understand the transgender plight. It all is concentrated in this dominant patriarchal mode of thinking, and thinking of one sex as the strong and other as the weak. So what is our equality doctrine in such case? The equality doctrine, as we have said, is a substantive law, procedural law approach to equality, the essential approach to equality. One is those who are same, those who are similar to be treated as the same. So sameness approach, those who look alike, those who are similar in terms of substance to be treated alike. What about those who are different? I have a body which is different from the strong male body, so-called. Now, my body is designed to carry the child. Therefore, my participation in the production process, in the socio-economic process, will be impeded when I am doing this function. Am I doing this function because of my choice, or because I'm a rape victim, therefore I became pregnant, or because I have a pressure to bear child? If I don't bear the child in the society, I'm seeing as a barren, condemnable woman. So to prove my identity, I become the instrument of culture, I become the instrument of family, I become the instrument of society. And then I make those choices. You know, one of the famous Kannada poets, Belagari Janakamma, writes that, it's a beautiful poem that she talks about. She says that, that a woman is pushed into the society. She uses in Kannada language, if I can say, Vasana baladinda beleda pashavanambi. ಒಳಗೆ ನುಗ್ಗುವುದೊಮ್ಮೆ ಎಳೆಗರುವಿನಂತೆ. What does it mean? Vasana baladinda means by force of impulse or by force of instinct. Vasana baladinda ಒಳಗೆ ನುಗ್ಗು ಬೆಳೆದ ಪಾಶವನಂಬಿ means the noose that is tying you when you grew up as a girl and as a woman. ಬೆಳೆದ ಪಾಶವನಂಬಿ ಒಳಗೆ ನುಗ್ಗುವುದೊಮ್ಮೆ ಎಳೆಗರುವಿನಂತೆ means you get into the fray of society like a tender calf. Means you don't exercise what Catherine McKinnon calls critical consciousness. Who you are, what is your essence, what are the differences that you have, but what is the sameness that you have. The cerebral material, the so-called gray matter, which is responsible for memory, IQ, etc., is the same in men and women. Biologically tuned characteristics are also turning into advantage in both men and women, where women never exercise that option in public life, or very few women exercise that option, and they proved it. Third, equal but different. In all matters, we are equal, but our difference in terms of anatomy, which excludes us or impedes our participation in society or production process for some time, to be supportive by state-supported creches, by maternity benefit, by maternity leave. Today we call as shared parenting in terms of parental leave. And then we are not to be treated as people who find our worth only as people who are meant for reproduction, and if we don't perform our function well or lose the capacity to perform that function, our worth is not to be undermined. So what about our participation in production? So production, reproduction binary also needs to be questioned. Therefore, when transgenders or when women do not get the opportunity, when they are excluded, then this kind of valid participation as citizens in the production process needs to be facilitated by the law. That's why we had Article 15, Clause 4. Special provisions shall be made for women and children. Now, even today, our election scenario is bad. Our legislative house representation is bad. We are 50% of the population. We are still not 20% in legislature. In judiciary, how are we? Look at our own profession. How are we in the law firms? Girls disappear after 30s. Very few women remain, either compromising their married life, either choosing not to have children, or they will have to become Durgas or angry women, like one of the A-class law firms leader is, in order to see that they are not bogged down by the pressure or they are not challenged. So we create these defense walls. My private life is mine. I have made these choices. Don't question me. Don't talk to me. Now that is where we come into the other complexity of gender justice, which Deborah Rod calls as sexism. Sexism is a kind of attribute where there is, once we understand gender and gender justice and gender inequality, we become oblivious to the deeper nuances. For example, look at the case which we decided, the famous air hostess case, where we spoke about women losing the claim to continue as air hostess after a certain age, because then they are not titillating and entertaining. So this is subtle sexism. She talks about subtle sexism, where it is not just about female, but among the female, what sells as a female, what is valuable as a female, appearance, color, then, the age, the youth. So this subtle sexism also comes in terms of remaining slim. So all these evils of anorexia and bulimia, they are all coming because of that, the whole fashion industry, which is built on skinny looking concept. So the beauty myth, beauty code. So Deborah Rod, as a Stanford lawyer, has written in American Bar Association's research that in our profession, we encounter such cases where women have been fired from a corporate job or from a leadership position because they do not fit into that. So when they do not fit into the sexist model, the subtle sexism operates, where between two women, the woman who plays into the patriarchal forces is chosen. So in America, there are a series of cases through which Deborah Rod proves that when a woman was denied a promotion or when she was fired from a job, the justification given was that her performance was not good, she had health issues, she appeared as a person who was not agreeable. So neutral language couching patriarchal bias and sexist bias, which is very, very subtle, which is appearance bias. I'm going to trouble you with all these ideas because most of the time we do not think of these things. We have to be self-reflecting because gender begins inside and gender stops inside. Unless we question our inside, we do not make the outside world gender equal and constitutionally just, therefore just. Now, in our profession, I told you about the girls disappearing after certain age, childbearing age coinciding with denial of promotion. This is called as glass ceiling, a ceiling which is not identifiable, the glass ceiling concept. So everyone thinks that after 30s, that girl got disinterested. She was frequently absent, so she quit the job. Why did she remain absent? She got married. She had a young child. She had to mind the child. When the child got sick or when the child had to be taken care of, it was she whose career was victimized. There was no question of both having shared parenting. So this is what it boils down to. Gender also means men being more responsible or the dominant gender being more sensitive and facilitating that. So how do we enable it through the law? Do we do a critical analysis of our existing legislations in terms of production process and reproduction? And then looking at our own legal world. I went to the Supreme Court Museum. It spoke about the first judge. It spoke about the first lawyer. It did not speak about the first woman lawyer. We have this Bombay-based woman lawyer who fought the Pardhanashim women's case in 1920s. To be registered as a lawyer, she was refused enrollment. And then she became the lawyer. And so what we see here is that even the Supreme Court Museum is no exception. And we have had sexual harassment allegations on judges, and Supreme Court came with the in-house rule after the first allegation came. And the second allegation inquiry process is being debated in the media. So this is where we see our own profession needs to be critically looking at gender justice. Now, coming to global parameters, somebody said about human rights. Within human rights, we have women's human rights, gender and human rights. If you look at that, CEDAW, CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which was signed in 1979, has got 2 articles for which India has passed reservation. One is Article 5, which talks about elimination of all forms of gender-based stereotype. I began my address with that. That stereotype to be eliminated, why is India refusing? Because culture is the biggest contested terrain between gender and human rights. Eliminating stereotype means that questioning the way we want our women to be seen. We want all women to be Sitas and Savitris and Arundhatis, whether they choose or not. We want to impose that. What Beleda Pashavanambi, what Belagari Janakamma calls. So if a woman chooses to be like that in an aware, educated kind of choice, we have no issues. But if a woman is pushed to that, so that kind of questioning of stereotype was not acceptable, but we have the media reinforcing and recycling those images. So more and more our girls become unthinking and uncritical of the way they are portrayed by the market, by the fashion industry, by the media, and by the scriptures, and by all other kinds of social processes, the subtle sexism. So this is where gender and culture, especially when I remember in matriarchal families, women hold the title to the property. And if you look on ground level, it is all men who go and sign on behalf of women. If you ask those men, why not bring your mother to sign this document? They say, why should she? What does she want? Why does she need money? How can she manage property? So the image is that women cannot manage. But if you look at the household, she is the one who determines the day, structures the routine, feeds the family, arranges to clean the house, or she cleans herself. She does multiple roles to make a home for these men who are busy in the public field. Therefore, public patriarchy is dependent and fed by the private patriarchy. So unless we clear our home, our mind, and our approach to the idea of gender justice as a comprehensive goal remains elusive. Therefore, your center's focus on research, policy, literacy is very well chosen, very well done. Now, I don't see it as a surprise, because I remember Dr. Subramania leading the Policy and Law Research Center in NUJS Calcutta, and one of the remarkable projects they led was on witch hunting. Would you believe, young students, that our country still has witch hunting practices, witch hunting incidents? Before the Supreme Court, cases were reported from Orissa and West Bengal. When I was looking for a law theater concept, I wanted to do the witch hunting concept for our students from Salem witches, which was some 2 centuries ago, witch hunting which happened in the US and in France. But I was surprised to see, as I was doing my research, that Supreme Court had fiddled with this case from Orissa. And there was a Odissi young girl from the National Film Institute who had made a documentary on witch hunting. So this Calcutta National Law School Center had carried out a comprehensive report which was guided and represented by Dr. Subramania. Now, coming to another dimension which you spoke about was reviewing the curriculum. Whichever curriculum you are reviewing, whichever student council you are making, whichever committee you are making, create better representation of girls and women and transgenders. Have them in committees as mandatory. We got this recent award in FICCI. My criticism was the entire panel was men, and the award was won by an institute which was led by a woman. This is the irony. And when I was trying to convince them, the approach was for me little uncomfortable, because although they were asking very professionally, excellent team, my discomfort comes from the fact that if there was one woman on the panel, she would be more listening. She would be presenting the question in a different way. So even the mode of communication, people will say that lady is excellent, she's aggressive, you know. So one who is aggressive among the women, this is subtle sexism. They wouldn't say because she's a woman, she's tender, and that tenderness makes all the difference. No, tenderness is not considered as a value. If a man is tender as an administrator or leader, they say, no use, he's like a mouse. So these stereotypes we have to grow out of, attributes we have to grow out of. So what I'm coming to is the process, the judicial process or the justice deliverance process, which is predominantly again needs to be questioned. I had the battered woman syndrome read from people like Carol Smart, who talk about how a woman who has murdered her husband, who was violent at home, when she was brought to the court, what kind of prejudices judges had. So because of that, how that woman was treated as a mad woman. The psychiatric, the criminal responsibility, diminished responsibility. Some of you students of criminal law will learn it later. Those came much later into the discourse. Another thing I want to tell you is about the tokenism in our judicial system as well as legal profession, especially the Nagpur bench woman judge telling in a child abuse case that unless there is skin to skin contact, we can't call that as abuse. I mean, that is a pathetic situation of gender awareness. Therefore, I request you, every law student, to be thoroughly gender aware. Otherwise, you will become one of the judges of this kind or a lawyer of this kind, or the lawyer who defended our Nirbhaya case. I mean, you see, they don't deserve contempt, but they deserve empathy because they did not see that their minds' boundaries are pushed. So gender justice and gender awareness is about pushing the boundaries. It is about a paradigm shift where the privileged class or privileged group of the society tries to think as the pain as well as the ways of making sense of the world, meaning making process like the others. So I'm bringing you to another quick point of narrative. The meaning making process is by communication, by using values, representations, symbol systems. So if you look at the media, the narrative is what we study in media law. I show students advertisements and things like that. We are talking about disparaging advertisement between RIN and SURF. But I'll tell you the advertisements which will pose. LIC recently carried an advertisement for a new youth scheme that we invest in his education. And that boy is an adolescent boy. What about her education? Save for him. So today we need to question these discourses. Unless we question these discursive practices and bring it within the Advertisement Standard Council's idea of disparaging advertisement, you are disparaging another gender, you are excluding another gender. This kind of a discursive narrative needs to be questioned. And when it comes to gender-based research also, you won't have enough of evidence in the legal books or case laws. You will have to bring the narrative from other sources. Therefore, interdisciplinary reading from literature. We developed the entire idea of feminism and many feminisms coming from sociology, coming from communication studies, literary criticism and linguistic studies, coming from psychology. For example, the entire idea of harassment as an issue of rights violation came from the tables of psychiatrists, because psychiatrists encountered issues of women complaining of headache after attending work, only to come to know that there was so much of pressure on the brain because of the kind of hostile work environment. So that is why Justice Verma put the phrase hostility, and Posh also talks about hostile work environment. So that is good enough to suggest harassment. Now we have certain indigenous models to discover gender justice. I don't know how many have carefully noticed Vasishtha advising Rama that if you are not allowed to sit in the throne, you can put Sita in the throne. That wouldn't have caused any kind of misery for Sita or the Rama or Lakshmana if they had heeded Vasishtha's advice. Wife as the attorney of the husband. It was unthinkable for our writers or poets. So that's one. We have, I have given you the example of Aliya Santana law, matriarchal law, where de jure, woman is the leader, de facto, man manages the property. We had very revolutionary judgments in contested terrain of culture coming from Delhi High Court with Justice Ravindra Bhatt on the Bari system in the Shiromani case, where in the Bari system, between two cousins, the entire temple was managed, but Justice Bhatt gave a decision where the female heir's time, that puja right was going to be going back to the other, thereby ending the tradition of their family. Justice Bhatt gave the decision that since it is the right of the family, it goes against the constitutional concept of equality if we terminate her right. For the 7 days of biological dimension of periods, she can appoint the attorney who could be including the cousin, but then it will go back to her. So this kind of innovation, judicial innovation to protect gender justice, we have seen in Shabarimala case, earlier in the Shabanu case, Sarla Mudgal case, and Triple Talaq case. So we have plenty of development in India which has reinforced the idea of indigenous dimension of facilitating the attorney concept of a sister and ending the gender injustice of denial, exploitation, and exclusion. So my appeal to all of you is please do more reading on critical legal studies, which looks at gender and race as a connotation of power, and that no law, no judgment, or no outcome in judicial sense or in the legal world is without politics. So politics or the power game has to be understood. So I hope that this center will indulge in such challenging, reconstructing, deconstructing, reforming, comprehensive gender justice goal. All the best to all of you, and congratulations to the Dean and the leadership of this center between faculty and students. I'm sure we will have many a partnership in days to come. All the best. Good luck.
Thank you, ma'am, for those inspiring words and giving us a wider perspective about gender justice. I'm sure all of us here will strive hard to achieve this goal in our country. I would now like to call upon Dr. Sabita Ramamurthy, Chancellor, CMI University, to deliver the presidential address.
Good morning to all of you, and Professor Dr. Sashikala Gurpur, Director, Symbiosis Law School, Professor Dr. Subramania, all the faculty members, students. I think Dr. Professor Sashikala Gurpur has given a comprehensive outlook on gender bias, and we can see her passion in this area. I'm sure starting of this Center for Gender Bias and Justice and Law, we should be able to do some progress and take your inputs also, ma'am. And I also would like to say that misogyny, chauvinism, and intolerance has always been a part of our society from times immemorial. Objectification, discrimination, and prejudice is not confined to any one community or group, but has been prevalent across the world, rearing its ugly head time and again. CMR University has always been committed to development-oriented change, and we stand true to this commitment in this and every other endeavor that we seek to engage in. We believe that bias and inequality has no place in the civilized world, and we will do everything possible in contributing to a world in which we hope everyone will not only be treated equally, but will indeed be equal. Our approach will primarily focus on building legal literacy, enabling education related to health, reviewing the socio-economic and political perspectives and policies, raising issues, promoting protection against violence. The center has been staffed by well-qualified personnel and has all the necessary infrastructure to carry out its objectives and activities. My best wishes to all will always be with the dean, faculty, and the staff of the school and the coordinators of the center. I hope that we will see great things from this center in the future. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would like to call upon our respected Vice Principal, Professor Vijay Praneshwaran, to propose the vote of thanks.
I will start with thanking Natasha for having invited me. In fact, when we were planning this event, we planned to have it an entire women's team. But then, fortunately, we had a male as a dean. We couldn't replace him, and neither could I be replaced as the administrative head. So that was a little dilemma that we were facing. But nevertheless, at the School of Legal Studies, we also have a very vibrant team of women. In fact, most of the times, the men, we are just 4 of us of the 20. And we feel proud to work with our colleagues and treating them in spirit equally and giving them all the opportunities, taking all the, or rather most of the facets and dimensions that Professor Dr. Shashikala Gurpur mentioned. Indeed, we are very thankful to Professor Dr. Shashikala Gurpur, Dean, Symbiosis Law School, and Director, Symbiosis Law School, and Dean, International University, for having joined us, having spoken about the different facets, dimensions, and the perceptions about gender justice. And of course, most of the presumptions, we don't realize that most of the times we don't realize that this, though we theoretically speak that we are equal and we are giving them equality, but somewhere we do have that mindset and the mental block. We need to break out of that. We will take the cue from you, madam. And as Chancellor Madam mentioned, that with your guidance, we will definitely take this center forward and providing a meaningful discussion and dialogue and bring out policies so that it helps in the objectives of the center. Once again, on behalf of CMR University and on behalf of the School of Legal Studies and Dean and Chancellor here everywhere, we are very thankful to you for having given us the inspirational address about gender justice and law. Thank you, madam. We are also very grateful and thankful to our beloved Chancellor Madam, also the President, CMR Group of Institutions, leading us from the front, always inspiring and always encouraging, and she has always supported us all our endeavors. And thank you, madam, for all your support, and also a special thanks for having joined us today and delivered the presidential address. We are also very thankful to Dr. Bhaskar Reddy, the Pro Vice Chancellor, for joining us and gracing this occasion. We are also thankful to all the deans and directors and all the authorities of the university for gracing the occasion. We are thankful to all the faculty, the students, and all the volunteers who are present and making this event a grand success. And last but not the least, our respected chairman, sir, who is also very supportive of all of our endeavors. In fact, this is the third of our center that we have inaugurated in the past month, the other two being on alternate dispute resolution and environmental studies. So we propose to make these centers more vibrant and make School of Legal Studies contribute to society also, having in mind our social responsibility. On that count, we are also very thankful to our chairman, sir, for having supported us in all our endeavors, and also thankful to everyone who made this event a grand success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. With this, we have come to an end of this event, and I take this opportunity to once again thank everyone for being here and gracing this occasion with your presence. Thank you.